So, if your nonprofit is looking to fundraise in Minnesota, you've got to know their rules. And let me tell you, they're a little unique. We're going to break down exactly when you need to register and what steps to take so you can stay compliant. Let's dive in.
Just so you know, this is part of our multi-state fundraising compliance series, and it's brought to you by the specialists over at Ironwood Registrations. We're really focused on giving nonprofit leaders and finance teams clear, practical guidance on these, let's be honest, pretty complex topics.
A question we get all the time is this. Once you get that federal 501c3 status from the IRS, are you just good to go? Can you fundraise anywhere you want? It seems logical, right? But the answer, unfortunately, is a big no.
See, the thing is, most states have their own, totally separate laws when it comes to regulating charitable fundraising. They actually require organizations to register with a state agency before asking their residents for money, and yup, Minnesota is one of those states. But here's where Minnesota really stands out from the crowd. Unlike a lot of states that have this blanket requirement for every single nonprofit, Minnesota's approach is conditional. Whether or not you actually have to register depends on how much you raise and how you're going about it. So, that brings us to the really important part. What actually triggers the need to register? Let's break down the 3 specific conditions that will require your nonprofit to register in Minnesota.
All right, first up, we're talking money. If your organization brings in more than $25,000 in total contributions in a single year, that triggers the registration requirement. Now, here's a crucial point. Government grants do not count toward that $25,000 limit. That's really important to remember. Next, it's not just about your money, it's about your people. The second trigger is all about your organizational structure. If your nonprofit has even 1 paid staff member, meaning you don't operate 100% with volunteers, you're required to register. It's a very clear line in the sand. And number 3, it all comes down to how you're asking for money. If you hire a professional fundraiser to solicit donations for you, you have to register. The state just wants to make sure there's transparency when a third party is raising money from its residents. So, if you check any one of those 3 boxes, a clock starts ticking. You have just 30 days to get your registration completed with the right folks. And in this case, that's the Charities Division of the Minnesota Attorney General's office. Okay, so you figured out you need to register. What's next? What does that process actually look like? Let's walk through the steps for filing and reporting. The initial registration really breaks down into 4 key steps. First, you're going to gather all your key documents. Think articles of incorporation, your IRS determination letter, your latest Form 990. Second, and this is a bit unique to Minnesota, the filing has to be formally approved by your board. After that, you submit the whole application and, of course, pay the filing fee.
And hey, speaking of that fee, there's some good news. The initial one-time filing cost in Minnesota is just $25. Honestly, it's one of the most reasonable fees in the country, and it's designed so it's not a huge hurdle for organizations. Now, this is a really important detail that's pretty unique to Minnesota. In most states, you have to do an annual renewal of your registration. Not in Minnesota. Instead, you're required to file an annual financial report to stay in good standing. It's a subtle but important difference. So what exactly goes into this annual report? Well, it's due 6.5 months after your fiscal year closes. You'll need to include your Form 990, your financial statements, and any updated info on your organization. The fee is $25, same as the initial filing. And if you need a little more time, you can get a 4-month extension, but you have to ask for it before the deadline hits. All right, let's shift gears a little and talk about some of the other important rules for organizations on both ends of the spectrum, who might be exempt, and what's required if you're a larger nonprofit. This is so important to understand. Exemptions are not automatic. You can't just look at the criteria and assume you're exempt. You absolutely have to proactively file a charitable organization exemption form with the Attorney General's office to make it official. So who might actually qualify for an exemption? Well, the list typically includes groups like religious organizations, accredited schools, and certain membership organizations. And, of course, the most common one is for those organizations that don't hit any of those 3 triggers we talked about earlier. Now, for the bigger players out there, there's a different rule to watch for. If your nonprofit's annual revenue goes over $750,000, you're required to submit financial statements that have been audited by an independent CPA. Okay, let's wrap this up by looking at a couple of key things you'll want to keep in mind, thinking beyond just filling out that first form.
And this is a big one. It doesn't matter where your office is located.
If your nonprofit is based in, say, California, but you're asking people in Minnesota for donations and you meet one of those triggers, you absolutely have to register there. And really, this quote kind of gets to the heart of Minnesota's whole approach. The state's laws are all about creating public transparency for those larger fundraising efforts, but at the same time, they get that forcing the full registration process on small, all-volunteer groups might just be an unnecessary burden. So this all boils down to one final, really important question for you and your organization. As your mission grows and as your fundraising gets bigger and better, is your compliance plan actually keeping up? That's something every growing nonprofit has to think about. You can see how the roles really depend on what you're doing and how you're set up, so taking a moment to review is always smart. If you need a hand managing these requirements, whether it's just in Minnesota or all across the country, the team at Ironwood Registration specializes in this stuff. You can learn more at ironwoodregistrations.com.